Today it's Politics Day, which means that David Harrison is with us, the former or lecturer emeritus, I guess I should say. You can correct me if I get this wrong, from the Evans School of Public Policy and Governance at the University of Washington. And although this is an equal opportunity situation, we have tended toward looking at democratic politics, but bring whatever questions or comments you want to as David lays out what's going on, and we try to make sense of what the future might bring. These programs are sponsored, and we're grateful for the support from Fieldstone Memory Care, which is located in Rolling Bay at the old Messenger House location. It's all spiffed up and they're open for business. They're offering innovative and compassionate care, and you can schedule a tour by calling 360-271-2530. David, thanks again. We appreciate you coming every time you do. And it seems like every month there's new permutations to the efforts of the current administration to try to meet their goals and sort of manage with the very organized or disorganized opposition.
Well, thank you. I forgot, I didn't see you there, Alice. Hi, I haven't seen you on the trail for months. Good to see you. I'm going to do three things, and if it takes us an hour, fine. And if it takes us less than an hour, we can always we can go home early. And since we're already home, that will just take a second. I want to do this in three sections. It's my custom, and I'll pause in between, as is also my custom. I want to talk first about the bets that are being made by both parties, which is also the subject of my blog that just came out, that you can get if you're interested in, and if you don't know how, just email me at dsh347@gmail.com, or if you have Sheila's email, she can tell you how to reach me as well. And then after talking about the bets that are being made, I will talk about the legislation that's going to get passed between now and Christmas. And a monumental thing happened last night in that the budget, government closure was yet again avoided and the budget bill passed. I'll talk a little bit about the significance of that. And after getting done with talking about what will happen between now and the end of the year, I want to talk about our individual actions. And I also want to talk about how we could do better than the conventional wisdom. Right now, the conventional wisdom is that it will be a off-year election, similar to a lot of off-year elections, where the party, as barely as we are in power with 50 senators, we've done a lot of things through reconciliation. And normally the party that's in power is rewarded by losing seats in the House and Senate during the off-year elections. So that's the prediction, that's conventional wisdom of the pundits. And I want to talk a little bit about how that might not happen, and what people, and how to look for that not happening, which would be a glorious result. As you know, we could lose either the House or the Senate, could even lose both, perish the thought, and we would still have the presidency, and we would be teeing up for an election in 2024 that will be monumental, because there's no way Joe Biden will be running at 81 or 82, even though he says he is. He has to say that. And my own feeling is Donald Trump won't be running either, but that's another story. So first, let's reflect a minute on how crazy the world's become, because right now there's a vigil. Where is it, Houston or Dallas, where Trump is supposed to be restored to the presidency by the reemergence of John F. Kennedy Jr., who's dead. So that's not going to happen, as you know. But the fact that there are members of Congress who support a sect, QAnon, that has elements that believe that it's going to happen show you a change in American politics. I am very fond of saying that we have had crazy things for a long time. And Trump wasn't even our worst president, I don't think. I think Buchanan wasn't around then, contrary to popular belief, but Buchanan couldn't have been more successful in leading us into the Civil War. So that's pretty bad. And there are other ineffectual presidents, of course, but what's new, I think, is there's more craziness on the surface. And the fact that there are people running around thinking that there's a huge conspiracy of child molestation led by show business people and Democratic electeds is just astonishing. At any rate, the bet's being made. The New York Times had a great article this last week on independents not supporting things that Biden has done, but not crediting Biden with those things. We've had a huge economic upturn. The unemployment claims that's much for the lowest in 50 years and 60 years, and 6 million new jobs, and Biden is not getting any of that in his column. I think that's unfortunate, and in fact, it's troubling. But it's not necessarily permanent, but it's to be watched over. And part of the reason, of course, he's not getting credit is the articulation by Republicans of what's wrong in America is, they're socialists and they're spending huge amounts of money. It's a shameful argument given the tax bill the Republicans passed, but at any rate, that's the argument. And there was a note just the other day in political.com saying that is going to be the argument. Mitch McConnell is aggressively opposing any articulation of a 2022 Republican agenda. Because there's no consensus among Republicans that they believe in any particular thing except saying bad things about Democrats. So that's deliberate. It's not going to change. You could have as many columnists and editorial writers and donors as you want saying, Mitch, tell me what you're for. And they're not going to do that. Similarly, any candidate that the Democrats can tie to Trump, they will. And Glenn Youngkin won in Virginia because he was hard to tie to Trump. And the good news for Democrats is most everybody who will win Republican primaries has to genuflect to Trump at minimum. And so it won't be hard to connect them with Trump. And that's helpful for us with independent voters, many of whom have walked away from Trump permanently, especially after the insurrection. So nonetheless, it's McConnell's bet that independent voters, when they vote next year, will feel bad enough about America and bad enough about America's direction that they will vote for the Republican, even though that person is tied to someone they don't necessarily support. Biden's bet, as I noted in my blog, is a different bet. Absolutely, to the extent that Tim Ryan in Ohio can tie his opponent to the worst of Trumpism, he needs to do that to go for independent voters. And that will be done by candidates all across the country when they can. And Trump will insist that those Republican candidates swear allegiance to him. So that's helpful for him. But Biden has to run on how America feels in June or November. And a lot of that is what will happen and what will be thought about the things that Biden did this year when we're involved in next year. So that is his bet, and that's the bet that if we're supporters of Biden, we have to stand behind. And so there has to be a narrative next year around this time the bridges are getting repaired, that we're making progress on climate change, that the economy is better, and that the pandemic is being managed and diminished. And if those things are happening, we can win on that bet. And you don't want to be in a situation next October if you're a supporter of the Democrats. You don't want to be in a situation where 1,500 or 2,000 people a day are dying of some all new strain, and we have 8% inflation, and you don't want that to happen, because if it happens, we'll lose 40 seats in the House and 5 or 6 in the Senate, and then we'll just have to go right back to what we did in 2018 and win them back again. So that's the bet. I'll stop for a second, and then I'll talk about what's going to happen between now and the end of the year.
So I guess I think the question there might be something around messaging and what Biden has to do to set the stage, or what we have to do to set the stage for the Democrats. Is that sort of what? I have some thoughts on that. Tom may have some thoughts.
Yeah, I have a comment. Coming from Ohio, from a small rural county, that was definitely red. I'm always encouraged, and I get a good feeling when I read your blog, David. But I've thought about it. I read it this morning, and I thought about it, and I realized what happens, and what we have to realize and understand. Perception is reality, and the Republicans control our perception. And it's not just in the national media. It's not just Fox News. They own so many media outlets. They own radio stations, TV stations, the newspapers. So they control a ton. And, for someone who's been in the arena, involved in politics, you see how they control it. It's not what you did, it's what they make it sound like you did. And, you have to like Biden has done all these good things, which we all realize, but people have to know that. They have to get that message. And the way the media operates, what we're faced with, that doesn't get out. Anyway, that's my 2 cents.
Reed, do you want to add to that before I respond?
Sure. Yeah, I don't know if you saw the former Montana Governor Steve Bullock's column in the New York Times this morning, but he was basically saying that Democrats are turning off rural voters by talking about climate change instead of climate jobs. They're talking about equity that comes off as socialism when it comes out of the Republicans' point of view, and that really a lot more time needs to be spent sort of hanging out in what you might call real America, in an effort to try to show that Democrats are not the pawns of elites. And he recognizes in his column that, on the one hand, you can't be a socialist and a pawn of the elites, but that doesn't seem to matter. And the storyline is getting lost there. So that's his suggestion about how to fix this messaging problem.
Well, as you know, both of you, the issue of how you remember, we messaged well enough a year ago to win back the Senate inexplicably, to defend in the House, although we lost 10 seats that we shouldn't have, on this very reason, articulating our police reform agenda as defund the police, cost of seats, I think. But as you know, there isn't one person that defines for Democrats how you overcome that built-in disadvantage that Tom Kilbane just described, where Republicans candidates have their own TV station, TV network. And that's not just the only one, because Sinclair Broadcasting owns a ton of radio stations there, where we have a media disadvantage. So there lately, this last couple of weeks, has been a lot of good writing about Democrats not being very good at articulating the message that resonates with say, in the battleground state of a blue collar worker or a rural voter. And I'm from Michigan, as Tom knows, and I'm from rural Michigan initially, and so I've had similar experiences. I have to remember both those states, Michigan more recently, have been Democratic states for a long time, even in the face of Fox News, until we lost the blue wall to Jim Comey and Vladimir Putin in 2016, and still won by 3 million votes. The blue wall was very reliable, and it included Pennsylvania, Michigan, Ohio, Wisconsin, so New Jersey. So I'm not so sure that's a permanent move away. I buy into everything you gentlemen said, except I think what America feels about all these things is an impermanent condition. So the bet that Joe Biden's made, that I totally give you is so far unsuccessful, is that the things that he's done this year matter in how Democrats run next year. Most notably a bipartisan infrastructure bill, but not just. So that's the bet. And, if we could, I don't know what's going to happen with Omicron. I think it's possibly overstated in terms of its, pretty soon. But if we could get to a situation where next August or September, where we're walking down the street en masse and we feel relieved, Donald Trump has ceded that territory. We could win on that alone. I also think the reason why Joe Biden won in the first place is he has a different way of communicating in those states than Hillary ever would even think of having. I think the future for Democrats depends on our ability to articulate to the center. And it is absolutely true that the economic agenda of Democrats can resonate with a lot of blue collar Midwesterners, and that the social agenda, depending on who's articulating it, might be a little bit harder sell. Remember, however, that 70% of Americans, including a mess of independents, do not want Roe v. Wade to change. So if we get an all new picture of choice next June, that will muddy the scene a lot more. I'm not arguing that things are wonderful right now. I'm arguing that they're impermanent. Sheila.
The only thing I wanted to say was you always, whenever I mention Hillary, I get angry. If she had run a decent campaign, she would have won.
Well,
I'm talking again, as I've done before and before about my friends and my 20 years of being in Wisconsin and my friends out there. They were so pissed with her, she never even appeared. So that in itself was in absolutely the worst thing she could have done.
They made a decision near the end to not go back to Wisconsin. Just African-American votes in Milwaukee alone would have won Wisconsin. But Karen, you were going to say something.
Yes, I know that we're talking about how Joe Biden can reach out to middle America or blue collar America. How about Kamala Harris? Do you think that she can do that? Because
I think it's unproven. I think the biggest problem is if you have to spend the whole first year as vice president standing 6 steps behind the president wearing a mask, this is not it's not an auspicious start in that regard. Certainly she has I think, a personality that would make it possible to travel, but she's from a more liberal wing. She's a Californian, so I mean, I think I told you folks, I've had these discussions with Maria Cantwell, who's from Ohio as well, about how Democrats can appeal to non-coastal people. And I don't know that it's in Schumer's DNA, or even though she's doing a good job as progressive Pramillas or AOCs. I just think the more moderate wing of the Democratic Party does not have a national spokesperson. But I think all these things are impermanent. And I think Joe Biden himself, I wish he were 10 years younger. I can say that. I wish he were younger than me rather than older than me, because you can see Joe Biden kind of saying, God, this is a long day. I'm 78. This is a long day. And I wish that weren't the case, but I do think he's doing a good job. Shall we move on to what's going to happen between now and the end of the year? I think we're all having the same worry here. Tom, you were going to say something?
I just have one comment. With what happens with Roe v. Wade, assuming that they change it, it'll be interesting to see how Biden's numbers change after that. Whether they start to go up, that should change people's opinion. We'll see what happens.
Good. Part of it is how they change it. So John Roberts is reputed to be thinking about changing what they are going to say about viability of the fetus. And if that turns out into just sort of let's have 15 weeks be a less assailable standard, I don't know if that will shift as many independent votes as we want it to. However, if the court, which is possible, creates each state as a choice war zone over, viability at a week or something like that, then I do think it will resound to our political. It'll be politically helpful to us because it will impact a very significant number of independent voters who are pro-choice. So on to chapter 2. On chapter 2, we need, before we get back to really our central theme, of which is I'm not saying that we shouldn't be worried. I'm saying that that what's out there as to why we would worry is a changing phenomenon. I'm trying to get us to remember what our bet is. It's because this is not an unintentional bet. One thing I will mention is when you're negotiating with Congress, it is going to be sausage. And the reason why we got susceptible to we're spending huge amounts of money is that Joe Biden himself and Bernie Sanders way to his left raised staggering amounts of money as an issue because they knew they were going to get less. But that's not a great communication scheme. They would be better off to get Manchin and Sinema and Pramila and Bernie in a room, Elizabeth Warren, and cut it in advance. It's the public war over whether it should be, Bernie said $6 trillion. And that's the kind of thing that's going to win Vermont. And we won't lose Washington State, but during a legislative session, that becomes our way to communicate with the public. And that's a big old grapefruit for Mitch McConnell to hit, and you can say as many times as you want, well, you passed a tax bill that was fiscally irresponsible, and you've run up 2/3 of the debt. That's an intellectual's argument. There is nobody in Reed City, Michigan, where I was born, who will recite that argument back to you. Not a single person. So on what's going to happen between now and the end of the year, keep in mind that we just got something that was swell, and that is they were going to close down. Mitch McConnell's smart enough not to close down the government over this weekend. And so he got to deal with this argument over extending spending, incredibly, is over unanimity by Republicans that Biden should not be able to mandate federal employees even to get a vaccine. So that's why they were threatening to close down the government. McConnell correctly perceived that Republicans would pay for that if they all, that it's easy to message that. We're still wanting to run the government. They're closing it down. That would have been a gift and would have dropped the stock market by 2,000 points. So they didn't do that. What they got instead is a vote on whether to take Biden's money away from enforcing vaccine mandates. And they lost that 50-48. So that shows you that amazingly, in a country that has now lost 800,000 people, you have Republican unanimity that it's a bad idea to tell people that they have to have a vaccine to have a federal job. So that's one of the most bizarre things that's happened all year. But so what will we get now that we have the budget bill? They have to figure out a way to raise the debt ceiling, or they have to close the government. They haven't done that yet. And yet again, all Mitch McConnell's looking to do is extract maximum Democratic discomfort. We're not going to close down the government. He's been involved in that in the past. It's never worked out well. He'll keep it from happening. There has to be a defense reauthorization for 60 years as they fought over everything else. They've done that together, and they'll do that. And the issue is whether our last reconciliation bill will get passed. I said in my blog that it would. Schumer is now saying that it's his goal. It doesn't really matter. He could pass it in January. He knows he has to pass that. We do not want to have the narrative be next year with that Democrats couldn't get together to pass their bill. And so it'll pass because it has to, and then everybody from AOC to Bernie knows that it has to. And what it will include is just three things. Now, mostly three things. One, it will include universal pre-K, that is, will fund pre-K across the nation, 4-year-olds and 5-year-olds. Second, it will include a ton of climate incentives, carbon incentives that do not include regulatory approaches that Manchin doesn't like, and includes credits toward buying your next electric and I think hybrid vehicle. And those will be huge, like $10,000 a car. And Manchin's already agreed to that. And third, some tinkering on Medicaid eligibility. What won't be in is the family leave stuff that Nancy Pelosi wants. There's no chance that Manchin will vote for that. She just included it in a House bill to poke Manchin in the eye. So that'll pass either December or January, and it'll fill out what the bet is, and then they'll go home after lifting the debt limit, doing whatever they're going to do on reconciliation. They'll go home, and next year they'll do some tidying up in January and February, and then that's off to the races in terms of the politics. They will not pass the Voting Rights Act, and they will not get the vote from Manchin and Sinema to overcome the filibuster rule to pass the Voting Rights Act. They won't pass the limited John Lewis portion of it. They're not going to do that, and they're not going to change the filibuster. And I'm still all right with them not changing the filibuster rule, because last I checked, we only have 50 votes. So it seems kind of possible that we'll have fewer than 50. So changing a rule that decreases our power a year from now is my idea of a really bad idea. So that's what's happening between now and the end of December. And let's stop there and see what you think.
So I'm just curious about this sort of playing chicken with the deficit or the debt limit and these bills to try to keep government going. It seems as though there are a lot of people who've talked about trying to get the debt limit off the table. Obviously, McConnell doesn't want to do that. But do you think that if that's something that that the Democrats would like to do long term?
Yeah, they have a proposal that automatically raises the borrowing limit, but it's easy enough for Republicans to block. It would need 60 votes. You couldn't do it by reconciliation. So it's a political thing. The thing we can do that is already in place is markets have decided that they don't like this. So whenever we get close, the Treasury Secretary is going to say, we will be out of money on X date because we can't borrow money legally because of the debt limit. And then as it gets closer, the market will get scared and it'll drop 1,000 points. And then people who hold large stock portfolios, many of which are Republicans, will call Mitch McConnell or Rick Scott and say, would you please stop messing around because you're endangering the levels of the market. So that's our protection. And they're not going to change the law as to the debt ceiling to keep these shenanigans from happening.
So the only real thing that is key then is for the Democrats to somehow not let the messaging around the debt ceiling or the bargaining from the Republicans get too out of hand. So it looks like they folded.
Yeah, that's true. It's not where we're losing on the messaging, as Tom said. We're losing on it more that we're out of touch with the things that are most concerning to independent. And I'm really not worried about how we're going to reach rural voters in Idaho. We're not going to win Idaho. I am worried about how we are reaching independent and sometimes rural voters in targeted states, not just the old blue wall, but now states that we have in play, Florida, Texas, Ohio, North Carolina, Arizona, Nevada.
Georgia?
Georgia, very much Georgia, since we need Raphael Warnock to win. I checked Val Deming's race against Rubio. She might be running 8 points behind. We need everything to get better for that race to be competitive. So before we close, let me say the things that could happen to make it better. Since this is the holiday season, and we definitely don't want to sign off saying that we're going to lose 20, 30 House seats and 5 Senate seats. I don't think we are. I think, but the reason I don't think we are is some things that are likely to happen. The first, of course, is back what I was saying about making the bet off mid-year elections, mid-course elections, next fall's elections will turn on the economy, and the economy is chugging along. Consumer spending is up. We have a little bit of an inflation problem, but the employment numbers are outstanding, and wage increases. So the chances are next January that we'll have an excellent argument in the one indicator that most influences whether Americans think we're going in the right direction. So there aren't huge economic warning signs as long as we can keep the pandemic at some kind of bay. And that's something that doesn't just require articulation by a president. That's something that's felt by the American people. Are there jobs available? Are wages going up? Is my company threatened? And the news next year should be good in that regard. The second thing that could happen is a little bit more at risk with Omicron. If you were saying that slowly and surely we're gonna get 80% of people vaccinated, then the COVID will run its course through other crazy people, and eventually by spring our death rates would go down to 300, 400, 500 a day. But we're bargaining with fate if we ever get a new strain that for which the present vaccines are ineffectual. There's not any evidence of that so far. That's just their worry. The cases in South Africa are modest. They're not seeing some big increase in the hospitalization or death rate. They're just worried, and we should be too. But if we could get to a situation in June where the pandemic's under control, remember, Trump has ceded that territory. Republicans are not going to be able to claim that all of a sudden they did that. Quite the contrary. The third thing that could happen is the Trump party could implode. Trump is calling for McConnell to resign right now. He's calling for candidates to say they would not vote for him as majority leader. That's pretty incendiary. And it makes for races in the Republican primaries, takes you back to 2010 when they had good take-it-back opportunities and they lost some key Senate races because of who they nominated. Trump is trying to help do that again, and including an extraordinary number of male nominees who have participated in trying to choke their sweeties sometime in the past. Just crazy, crazy people. And so that's what could happen. The Youngkin election in Virginia doesn't have anything to do with it. If you look at the candidates in Ohio, Georgia, North Carolina, Pennsylvania, Trump is trying to choose the person who is most loyal to him, regardless of that person's past. That's a great thing for us with regard to independent voters. The fourth thing that could happen, of course, and this, remember, resounds in the House too, where Kevin McCarthy is still being punished by Trump for saying that that January 6th was a bad thing. So stay tuned. There's even a movement among some Republicans to elect Donald Trump Speaker because you don't have to be a House member. That's great. Anytime they want to come out with that, you should send them a check. The bigger thing that could happen, of course, is Trump's in legal trouble on three fronts. There are still the tax fraud cases in New York. That grand jury just got re-impaneled and extended for another 6 months. It's not clear that there aren't going to be some meaningful indictments there. Second, the Georgia election fraud claims are still there, where the Fulton County prosecutor is thinking of charging Trump on that ground. Thirdly, Mark Meadows has agreed to testify with regard to the insurrection. The contempt of Congress citation charge can bring you jail time, or you just stay in jail till you're no longer contemptuous. So there's been a lot of things that Congress has tried to do. The courts have not upheld, but it's not clear that certainly the courts would protect Trump from having to go before the committee, but people like Bannon and Meadows are looking at trouble, and Meadows will testify. And I think he hear a little bit more about Trump's culpability on January 6th, which would be helpful to us. Americans are against insurrection generally. The last things that could happen, a resurgence of us. We had a huge campaign effort, and we're getting a little on the couch-ism right now. But having said that, there's a lot of people doing a lot of work. Kem Schreier, in just to the east of us, now has a serious opponent. As you remember, we took back that seat. Now we've had it for 2 terms. She's a great member of Congress, and Reagan Dunn, who's a Republican King County Council member, is running against her. He's got $300,000 in the bank. She's already raised $3.5 million. We need that kind of attention to detail. So we could have a resurgence of what we did in 2016 and 2018 and 2020. And then, as I've said, what the court does on Roe v. Wade could help us politically considerably. The bad news would be it would hurt us in terms of our social welfare, but it could help us. So you're looking and hoping that one or all those things will happen. In terms of our personal commitment, those of us who are tied to this or that working circle should get back to that circle. There's a ton of indivisible circles. For those of you who want a circle and don't have one, Common Power in Seattle is a great portal to doing door knocking, doorbelling, phone calling. They're just excellent. That's the one that was started by David Domke, who's a former UW professor. And you can get the link from my blog. If you're unaffiliated and want to do work, it's a great place to go. If you're wanting to give money, I hardly ever give money directly to an individual candidate without knowing how much money they already have in the bank. And I follow swing left a lot. Of among all the nationals, the people who I think do a better job of targeting which Senate races we're most likely to win and which House races is swing left. And I would check them if you need guidance on where you're sending your dollars. I would not, they'd kill me for saying so, I would not give money to Maria Cantwell, Patty Murray, or my beloved friend Derek Kilmer. He doesn't need your money, he'll be fine. That's my view. Any closing thoughts, questions or thoughts? It's probably 20 minutes after, no, it's just quarter after. Thoughts on any of those things?
Tom.
I have one thought. I appreciate all the time you talk about independence, because if you've actually, if you've been in politics, you look at the registrations in the different states, and you find that independents make up, minimum 30, maximum 50% plus of the electorate. There aren't that many, registered Democrats and Republicans. So what you're really aiming at always is independence. And so I know you know that, David, and I just wanted to emphasize that.
That's absolutely right. And the number of registered Republicans is actually going down, and Democrats are pretty much holding steady. And independents, is self-identified independents, are where we're heading, and why we won by 7 million votes last time. I know you thought we should win by 15 million, but we didn't. And so that's the crux of why Joe Biden's approval rating has suffered, and that's a crux of the bet with independents. Remember, they made a decision, especially suburban women, a profound decision that they would not buy into the misogyny and hatred and racism of Donald Trump. And it's not an easy thing once somebody's made that decision to move back in the other direction. Remember also demographic destiny. I got a note after one of my blogs, and my note writer said that it's way overstated and that Democrats are taking people of varying ethnicities for granted, and we didn't do that well. It's not true. We did. Democrats are not going to take folks of Latinos and African Americans and Asian Americans for granted. If you look who Biden has appointed to various jobs, quite the contrary. We did very well with the Latino vote, just not in Dade County with Cuban Americans. And so on Sunday, I'm having a blog that some of you are on with Zoom with the National Field Director of Mi Familia Vota. And that news is great, not just in Texas and Arizona and New Mexico and Nevada, but as well in blue collar states. There's a lot of Latino votes and that we need to attend to.
And I'd just like to throw out that the COVID situation is basically positive. We're seeing increased testing possibilities. Looks like we may get some support from, I'd love to see more free tests or dollar tests, but at least there's the possibility that people will be able to get reimbursement for the tests that they buy. Yeah. And then there's news today about treatments that look very promising. And so even if we have people who are refusing to get vaccinated, they may get better treatment, and that will reduce the power of the disease. So
yeah, it will reduce hospitalization and deaths, and that's nothing but
it may not turn them into Biden voters, but at least it will take the fangs out of the story that somehow Biden is losing the fight against COVID.
Yeah, well, I think independents want to see a better situation next June, and I think we may well have it. 30% of non-vaxxed people polled feel motivated by the Omicron story. So hopefully we'll get a little tick up from that and from the mandates.
We look forward to talking about these things with maybe some more accomplishments to talk about in a month.
Let's hope for a good end of the year. Good to see you.